We get quite a lot we get to see quite a lot of government acquisitions. We'll get a document and a request to respond, and some of them you look at and you wonder what is it that they want, and you end up thinking, well, they're going to get something, but I don't think that they know what they really want. And we got one day this beautiful, crystal clear, well-written invitation that we responded to and won the contract. It was from the Volpe Center, which is a contracted group within the Department of Transportation. And come to find out that it had been written by the head of their acquisition department. It was beautiful, it was crystal clear. I said, wow, these people really deserve something good. Their problem was that their acquisitions and their HR service organizations had a fairly high degree of customer dissatisfaction, primarily because of cycle time. So we went in and we led the project to streamline those and improve them. But probably more important, we took Alan with us, and at the end of that he was able to engage them to do a visual workplace, which made absolutely all the difference in the world. So Alan?
Thank you, Denton. Appreciate that. So just as a quick introduction, before we get into the presentation, a little bit of background that may help you. I-5 Services, so I'm the CEO of I-5 Services, and we build technology that really helps to change a company's bottom line or to change an industry. A couple of quick examples. We have a product called the Manufacturers Marketplace, which is an online database that allows manufacturers to connect at a very granular level, the level of certifications, processes, any type of equipment or products, anything that will help them be able to search and find each other. And so that one is just one quick example, but it's having a significant impact to the supply chain of manufacturers, allowing them to find manufacturers closer to their facilities and be able to shorten up that supply chain. We build other solutions too, and this one's probably worth mentioning just to make sure that I kind of set the stage for some of the visual workplace presentation that we're going to give. And that is, we have a product that's called our i5 Insight product, and we implemented it actually first with a company here in Ogden, a small manufacturer. At the time we started working with them, they were about $3 or $4 million in annual revenues. And what they really needed was visibility into their projects. They were finding out way too late in the project that they had an issue or a problem with that project, and that for some reason they were going over on their expenses. But finding out late in the project, there's nothing you can do about it. If you can find out early in the project, then obviously there's something you can do to try to correct that. So giving them a really visual representation of their projects at the highest level, at what we call the dashboard level or the visualization level, and then allowing them to drill into each of those projects to see exactly where they're at in their tracking of their expenses as well as the project completion, and be able to take corrective actions as they see changes that are occurring, and even be able to notify them proactively about when some of those challenges or issues are coming up in their projects. Well, they've grown tremendously. In fact, the first year we started working with them, they had this goal of getting to 28% margins. They'd always made it right around 18%, I think was the best they've done, and they always wanted to get to 28. And I just remember Rich Marker calling me, the CEO, calling me on December 31st, and apologize to say, hey, I'm sorry to interrupt you, and sorry to call you out of the blue, but I just wanted to share with you that we hit 28.5% margins this year, and it's due to the technology that you guys have put in place. So really a great testament to us that we've helped him find the right kinds of issues, and they've been able to make the changes they need to. I think now they're about $14–15 million in annual revenues. They've grown significantly. Their margins have stayed high. It's been a really great testament to that type of a solution. But the key there is making sure that it remains transparent to the organization. And that solution that we put in place made it transparent to the organization. So with that background, there's just a couple of things we really want to talk about today that will help you get a better understanding of the project that we had at the Volpe Center with the Department of Transportation, the impact that it had, and how that really applies to each one of us. We'll touch on the problem, the approach, the lessons learned and recommendations, some solutions, and then what they're doing now to move forward. Just right here on the problem at the beginning, one of the first things that they struggled with was their pulse were too long. I don't know how many of you know what PALT is. It stands for Procurement Action Lead Time. So your procurement department will have, they have lead times on any type of procurement that they do, and they're supposed to meet these lead times, right, that they have. I see a few nods, so I know a few people have dealt with this in acquisitions. And the government has basically stated, here's how long it should take for every type of acquisition that we do in the government. So if it's a very small dollar acquisition, it should take this amount of time. If it's a large dollar acquisition, it should take this amount of time. They call them PALTs, Procurement Action Lead Times. But they were too long. They were going over the government mandated time that it was supposed to take for acquiring products, or goods or services. Closeouts were not timely. So part of that procurement time is also the time it takes to close the project out once it's complete. So if they don't close the job, or don't close the procurement, and don't deobligate any funds that may be remaining on that, it could stay open for years. And it actually appears that they're not doing their job very well. In fact, sometimes it can mean millions of dollars that are being held in reserve in places where they shouldn't be. And those dollars need to be deobligated and used elsewhere. Customers didn't have visibility into the process or status. They had a real public relations problem. So their customers were the technical areas of their organization, and they all expected that, hey, when we have a procurement, we expect you to keep us informed as to where we're at on that procurement, how long it's going to take, and you know, if there are any problems with it, we expect you to raise those to us. Let me add to that problem a little bit. They do about 3,000 acquisitions a year out of that center. And at any given time, they may have as many as 1,500 of them active. They have about 15 people working on them. So that gives you an idea of the workload that they're carrying. And in order for them to communicate to the organization the details of 100 different procurements every single day or week is an absolutely impossible task. But that's what their customers were upset about. They were not getting enough communication, enough visibility into what was happening on those procurements. Yeah, the longest procurements were taking as long as 3 years. I remember one, it stands out because it was, and unfortunately I forget the exact title, but something, quick purchase of, I can't remember what it was. And this quick purchase had taken now 3 years, and it was kind of the joke of the entire center that this was a quick purchase. It had taken 3 years to get it completed. And some of their procurements do take significantly long periods of time, because sometimes they're purchasing hundreds of millions of dollars worth of products or services, and they can take a period of time to get them completed, following all the regulations that have to be followed. However, 3 years is still an enormous amount of time. It shouldn't ever really take that long. And there was just general frustration on both sides of the fence, but everyone had this finger-pointing mentality. It was the other person's fault. Acquisitions felt like they were unfairly judged, and the rest of the organization felt like acquisitions wasn't doing their job. So a significant problem to their center. On the HR side of the house, as Denton said, you know, Denton and I started working on the acquisitions. By the time we had started to get to the close of theirs, Steve Avery, actually, who Wayne talked about earlier, was working with the HR side of the house. And he had asked that we come down and kind of help go through the remainder of the process with them as well. And so it was nice to go down and understand what they were looking at. But the problems were not very different from one to the other. Hiring actions were taking a year or longer. So if you can imagine waiting around a year for the government to hire you, you're probably not going to be able to sustain that, right? Very few people are going to be able to sit around and wait for a year, and certainly not the best people. So you want the best people, you can't wait a year to get them hired. Your hiring process has got to be much faster. It was a very cumbersome process and difficult to track, and I'll show you just a little bit of a feel for it inside of their application today. There's 7 major steps they have to follow. Within each of those steps there are subtasks that have to be completed, and this is following the government regulated mandate for hiring. So and again, the customers didn't have any visibility into the process or the status. They were trying to track it on a spreadsheet and update it, sometimes out to the people who were making the requests, but seldom were they being successful at getting that information out effectively. Again, they had hundreds and hundreds of hires they were working on at any given time, and it was difficult to provide that visibility. So a similar kind of general frustration there. The approach we took is basically the approach that we've talked about a number of times and you guys are intimately familiar with, so I won't spend a lot of time on the approach. Denton actually sat down to do the critical quality outcomes that the customer wanted. The teams were selected as cross-functional teams from it had representatives from the customer base as well as from acquisitions, HR, anyone who had a vested interest in that process, including legal and finance on those teams, and members of the executive team as well. So these maps will look familiar to you, I'm sure. We mapped the process. This is one of the smaller maps, but if you can imagine, and you guys that know your purchasing process will understand this very well, if you're to map the government purchasing process, it is a massive map. And we had butcher paper along the walls and walls and walls of conference rooms just like this with thousands and thousands of stickies to map all the different types of procurements that occur within the government. And it is a rather lengthy process map. Following through this, you guys are familiar with these steps, so it won't take a lot of time, but estimating what it would take to make those improvements. Or how much time was being wasted, and then taking the sticky dots and just making sure that we identified where there was waste, where there was opportunities, where pain points were. And as the teams worked on this and they started looking at the map after the dots were put up on it, it was really, really apparent and very easy to see where the pain was occurring, and most of those were in handoff situations. So it became really apparent and transparent to everyone in the organization where a lot of the issues were occurring. And it's breakdowns in communication, it's challenges with getting the teams working cohesively together. Let's see, so just kind of continuing through the process, we created 2B maps and process improvement tasks. Projects were created. Owners from the working group were selected, so within the working group themselves, they would take projects to be the owner of those projects, and they would select their team that they needed to be able to carry out those projects, providing who, let's see if we can see that over there, a who and also a when as to when they expected to complete the projects, so that they had everything really assigned out by the time we completed the initial workshops. So a few lessons that were learned there. By the time acquisitions in particular and even HR were engaged in the process that they needed to be engaged in, it was too late in the process. So for example, the technical team would identify the fact that they needed to purchase something, and they may have been working on that for 6 months, figuring out the requirements, finding out who they wanted to work with, all those kinds of things, and at the end throw it over the wall to acquisitions and expect that they turn it around overnight and have it completed. Well, it doesn't doesn't quite work that way, because in the acquisitions process, they have to know, there's so much information they have to know about that supplier, about the process, and they need to be engaged throughout the process in order for them to really have the right kind of impact and to provide to the customer the results that the customer's after. So they were trying to track and provide visibility with Excel spreadsheets, and as I mentioned, with hundreds and hundreds of acquisitions that they were working on at any given time, one single individual was having an impossible time trying to just manage updating their customers. This is something that I really wanted to point out. The individual heroics were absolutely commonplace. It was something I did not expect to see in that organization, but these people were working their hearts out. They were giving absolutely everything they had on a daily basis, regularly working overtime, and many times without pay, to try to get the acquisition out the door, particularly as you got to year end. So they reached fiscal year end in September. We're basically living at the office for a month. As we try to get the remaining acquisitions out. A lot of it got pushed on them late in the game, and they were expected to perform. They couldn't not meet the deadline, so they couldn't cross over into October. Every acquisition had to be done within September, and so these individual heroics were phenomenal. And in particular, I do want to talk about, and didn't touch on this at the beginning, we're working with just some of the most amazing people we've had the privilege of working with. And I after having worked with a couple of government organizations, I'm finding this true in many government organizations that I've been working with. There are tremendous people working in government, and by and large, everyone's trying to do a good job. And so I'll talk about Mary Doherty for just a second, because she was our sponsor in acquisitions. She's the head of the acquisitions department there, and just a brilliant mind. First off, very, very capable person, and just fantastic at being able to lead her team and get the job done and protect the government's dollars the right way. The acquisitions job is to make sure that government dollars are spent legally and in the correct way. And you won't find, I don't think, a better person at doing that than Mary Doherty. She's absolutely phenomenal. And she has been a champion within that organization for the process improvement. So she, in large measure, has been the best champion and certainly the most notable champion that they have. She led what they call their AIM initiative, which was the title they gave to their process improvement initiative. And she has been responsible for reporting up the chain of command through the deputy directors and to the director of the progress that was being made across the AIM initiative, as well as ensuring that it's being widely publicized and results were being recognized across the organization. And so as a champion, she's really, I feel like, has given a tremendous example to everyone as to how to lead as a champion of a process improvement initiative. Her counterpart in HR was Sue Connors, and again, much like Mary, I just can't say enough. And Sue, in the following years, has since been promoted to deputy director, and has just done a phenomenal job. And Sue now is largely responsible for getting the ball moved the rest of the way. We talked a little bit about some of the frustrations you have about getting this across the organization. Well, Sue has done a fantastic job at engaging the rest of the management staff and getting the director now on board. In fact, I'm going back next week to have the conversation with them about how they roll this out across their entire center, which is something they had hoped for from the beginning. It was an island to begin with, and they've been able to expand that island out to where now they are getting the buy-in for the whole center.
Yeah,
Denton?
Alan, if you could, just what has been the result with work flowing in?
Yeah.
That's a great
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's a great thing to note here too. So their acquisitions department has done such a phenomenal job that down in Washington, D.C., they started to notice that the acquisitions, those pults that we talked about, have consistently been improving over time. And so much so that they realized that they have a very effective team up there at Volpe.
They felt like they were they knew they were ineffective at doing their procurements in DC. And so they came up and said, we would like to run a pilot program. We'd like you guys to be our pilot. We're looking at combining some shared services functions, and we'd like you to run the acquisitions for our DC department. And as a result of that, they picked up another 300 acquisitions. Unfortunately, they didn't give them any more staff to do that. So an already overtaxed group took on those 300 acquisitions, but because of the improvements that they made, they were actually able to take on those 300 acquisitions and do a much better job than what the DC group ever could have done, and they did that because they had improved that much. And so they continue to get more work brought to the center, and as they go through the process of consolidation now, it's quite clear that if they're going to consolidate acquisitions, it'll be consolidated at the Volpe Center. Because they are truly excellent at what they do. So I talked about the quality of the people, very high. They're looking for increased collaboration, but didn't have a formal process to achieve it. One of the things was, as we started asking questions of the group, without exception, everyone kept saying, and this was on the tech side as well as acquisition side and the HR side, that they all wanted to work more closely with their customers and with their suppliers, right? So their customers saying, we want a better relationship with acquisitions and HR and acquisitions saying, we want a better relationship with the tech center, but it wasn't being achieved. So a lot of lip service to it, but nothing was actually being changed at that time. It's customer satisfaction. They had done some customer satisfaction surveys, and I don't remember the exact results. Maybe you do, but they were really low.
Yeah, and declining.
And declining, yeah, without question. So some recommendations. As we went through that process and we came out, we started working some of the projects, getting them framed up. Denton put together a nice report for them that talked about some of the recommendations that we had for them. Putting in a quality system, including a shared document repository, process instructions. I will note one example out of there. One of the projects that they identified was documenting their roles and responsibilities after they had improved the process, and they had this new and improved process that they could follow. And by the way, just the improvements that we identified through that initial work shaved months off of their average procurement time and off their average hiring time both. And so just huge gains that they had. But they recognized that they needed to sustain them, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And they recognized that there were some other challenges they had. So in documenting the process, they knew they needed to better document the roles and responsibilities associated with the new process, and then they needed to train across those roles and responsibilities for everyone involved in the process. Without that, they knew that everyone would go right back to doing it the way they'd been doing it forever, right? And we all have that tendency. They recognized they needed some improved training, and that was one of the recommendations we made, corrective action system and some process instructions in the compliance system. Also, continuing along there, some metrics. So we would ask them questions back then, like how many procurements do you have active right now, or how many hiring actions do you have in your queue? And they couldn't answer those questions. They seemed really basic to us, but to them, there were no answers. They didn't have that information pulled together in any way that they could gather that information quickly. Really making sure that they track some of their key metrics is one of the strong recommendations we made, and we'll talk about that in a minute and how they went about solving that. Doing regular customer satisfaction surveys and having an information system. Some of the solutions. They implemented many of the recommendations that we gave them. They had some very clear owners of some great projects. They definitely reduced their cycle time and their pulse. They improved their closeout time in their HR, in their procurements, and reduced their hiring time in HR. And they decided to move forward with this visual workplace. So before I jump into the visual workplace, one of the things that we really found was critical to their success and they were struggling with the communication issue as well, is being able to get to the point where without having to put forth any additional effort, they could communicate the status of where they were at on any given procurement or hiring action at any given time to anyone who needed to see it. And in fact, those people could have it for themselves and even have that information pushed to them, so that it didn't put more burden back on the group that was trying to get the work done. And so the visual workplace became one of their driving initiatives. In fact, it was their number one, and the reason that they retained I-5 Services to continue on with them was so that we could help them put this into place. So I thought it would be good if we just went through, and I'll give you just a feel for a little bit of the application that's in place for them, what that looks like. But before I jump into that, what questions do you have about that project or about our approach of what we did?
I had a question, but I think we're going to cover it.
Okay. Well, go ahead. Just ask and just make sure I don't.
So I wanted to get a better understanding on how you displayed and shared the metric of the road throughput yield and some of the other specific.
Okay, yeah, and you're right. You'll see some of those in here. I don't think I have all the dashlets in here that we put together for them, but basically any metric that they needed. And again, you don't want to put this type of a visual representation in place on something that maybe you're only in the measure phase for, right? A measure phase is about getting something in place that you can quickly put in front of people and make some decisions on, right? And even analyze. But once you hit that control phase, if it's something you're wanting to sustain, it's really difficult to sustain manual processes. And it takes a lot of effort to do it. The electronic solutions that are available to us today are in many ways providing so much more value to an organization by using those in the appropriate way and at the appropriate time. It's critical, I think, to the success of sustainment. So, great question. And I will touch on that a little bit more. Any other questions as we go through? Yeah, please.
On your process map, you had those little sticky dots.
Yeah.
I've actually not seen that before, so is that something I can just go to the internet and get how to do that, or is that something?
Yeah, or yeah, just to ask me or Denton or Wayne. Yeah, yeah, we can show you. Yeah, it's a great tool to use at being able to identify really where your pain points are, your waste is, and some of those kind of things. So
Great, thanks.
There's a lot of people involved there.
it does, yeah.
Lots of people involved.
And so and Wayne mentioned early on, I'm not classically trained in Lean and Six Sigma. I've had enough training to be a black belt, but I am also trained in what's called Agile methodology, which is the equivalent on the IT side. And so it's the combination of those skills, and we use a lot of those same types of things in the work that we do. And so it's a perfect fit, actually, between the Lean Six Sigma principles and the Agile principles.
I'm sorry, I just can't resist jumping in a little bit. Promontory Management Group, our bread and butter is doing Six Sigma. We did not do any Six Sigma at the Volpe Center.
Yeah. Yeah.
All that was required was this real simple, basic mapping technique and finding the pain points. And so we didn't have to train people. We just went to work, and Alan is extremely skilled at that. And away we went.
And the process we follow is very simple, and so it's really easy for almost anyone to sustain as well. So we've been able to help them sustain this process, and the roles and responsibilities project that they ran was a multi-year project, actually, and they used the principles we taught them in those workshops, and they ran the roles and responsibilities for themselves, even though it took a long time, and with very little mentoring from anyone after that, right? So a little bit of touch points. So. Brian?
You had a kind of a punch list of projects, and it looks like people took responsibility for certain things.
Yeah.
How would you, what was the mix of the projects? Were a certain amount of like easy, just do it kind of things, and then others were hey, some more analysis, or we need to get stakeholder involvement? What was kind of the mix of the project punch list?
Yeah, great question. So we did categorize them. After we'd identified them, we kind of broke them out into the quick wins, and then into kind of small, medium, large types projects, depending on the number of stakeholders that needed to be involved, how large the process was. Roles and responsibilities was an example of one of their large projects. But just the quick wins alone, I think they had, I can't remember the exact number, but it was close to 30 or 40 quick win projects. And they carried those out in about a quarter, maybe 3 or 4 months at the most, and had them all completed or close to completed within that period of time, and had realized the gains of those quick wins. And I think that really triggered a lot of success within their organization, because people could see very easily some of the progress that was being made, and it was easy to communicate that out to everyone. You know, here's the project, here's what we accomplished, and that communication that they did was really critical. But then the larger projects they've been working on, in fact, they have an ongoing roadmap of projects, and I just reviewed it with them recently, and I think there's still probably 20, 25 projects left on that roadmap. New ones that were identified after we worked with them, and a few that were still on the list that haven't been completed yet. So.
We were only there, our first visit was 3 days.
Yeah.
And at the end of 3 days, how many projects did we close out?
It was crazy.
It was crazy. We
Yeah.
we were closing projects, just bang, bang, bang.
Yeah.
And Mary had them up on the wall, completed,
Yeah.
stamped off.
Yeah, for a while they kept some of the work that we'd done in the workshop up on a hallway, or on a wall in a hallway, up on the 11th floor. And so people walking by would be able to see what they had, but they were just taking these little signs that said completed, sticking them up there for the projects that they had done, and it was really great. It created a lot of really good momentum for them. So, okay. Any other questions before we move? Okay. So this will give you just a feel for a little bit of the dashboard. I obviously have not tried to put everything in here, just enough to hopefully give you a flavor for some of the things that they're tracking. This is the PR, means project requisition. So these are accepted project requisitions by schedule status. So schedule status being either they're behind, they're on time, or they're at risk. So very quickly you get a feel for overall how are we doing, and that's what that one's really supposed to be. 76% on time. If you ask them how many projects were on time when we walked in the door, number one, they couldn't tell you, but the tech side would tell you 0, and the acquisitions would tell you about 50%. And so their improvement has been tremendous. And this isn't even current data. They're actually much more accurate than this now. These slides are a little bit old. So in process PRs and awarded action counts, you can see they're just tracking very quickly, and looks like physically completed and awaiting referral to close out. Okay, so they've physically completed the work on them, but they haven't been closed out. This is before they ran their closeout project. So they ran so you'll notice there are almost 1,000 of them that are sitting there waiting to be closed out. That project that they ran recently to improve the closeout time, and we know about it because they asked us to make some improvements to the application for them for tracking for their control. And they're down to, I think, about 30 or 40 now from 1,000. It's been a massive improvement for them. But this made it visible. They could finally answer where they were at, how many they had. So active, you notice they had just under 500 at that point, point in time that this was taken. Tells you by office within their organization roughly how many acquisitions are active, so gives you a feel for the customer base. This one basically is just showing here's some that need attention, and again this is an old one that shows how many days are remaining, so they're in red because these are the ones that are overboard or overtime. And again, this is old data, but their average processing times. The reason I throw this one in is because across the bottom here, these are all the different types of acquisitions that they do within their center. And they're trying to track every type of acquisition, how long it takes on every type of acquisition, and where they're at in the status on every single given one of those at any given time. So from kind of that dash split level view or dashboard view, typically we try to build every solution so that you can get from the highest level summary of data down to the lowest level of detail in 3 clicks or less. It needs to be very effective. You need to be able to get right to the information you need. So that highest level or kind of the graph view, this is now getting into what we call a list view. So it's listing out their PRs that are in process. You can see there's a number of actions they can take here, up to and including, individual notes about it. They can edit. They can do a lot of different things right straight from the list view. But the detail level, I'm not going to go over the detail level because you can't really see it anyway, but it'll give you a feel for it. One thing that I will touch on, though, their ability just to add a note and have somebody else be able to see that note when they added it to that procurement was a huge step forward for them. So they actually set the notification, so as a user of the system, I can set my notification preference as to whether or not I want to be notified when there's a change to the PR. And I can say I want to be notified when there's a change to a date, a change to a note, a change to whatever it is I want to know about my PR. And I'll actually get an email notification saying your PR has changed and this information has been updated. I can click on that. It'll take me straight here. I can read the note that the acquisition person put in there that tells me everything I need to know about my acquisition and where it's at. So, yeah.
Is this software that you guys developed, or was this off the shelf?
Yeah. No, this is ours. Yep. The ability to export data. So again, if you're running a project and you've got all this rich data in here, it would be an absolute waste if you couldn't get it out and analyze it. So there's always an option for getting it out, analyzing it. For those that are running new projects, they're getting in, analyzing this data as well to help them with upcoming projects. This is once the acquisitions have been awarded. I'm going to skip through some of this real quick. There's some very robust user management and role management. As you know, there are so many levels of security that need to be maintained, and certain people can see certain data, other people cannot, and so there's a very sophisticated user management and role management system behind this that's actually able to be maintained by the customer. So they don't need our involvement when they need to make a change, when they need to add an employee or somebody gets promoted. They're able to manage all that within the application and their accounts as well. On the HR side of it, you're going to see a lot of similarities between the approach. The data is very, very different between the two, but the approach is not entirely different. So in this case, we're looking at the HR queue. This is showing within each department how many hiring actions they have and what the status is of those hiring actions. So it looks like V330 was the most active at the time we took the snapshot. They have hiring queues, they have hiring action lists. The difference being hiring queue is those that are actively being worked on at the time. My hiring actions could be every status, closed out, not yet put into the queue, all those kind of things. Won't go through a ton of detail here, but I will touch on this part. So they have 7 different phases for hiring, everything from validating the need and internal approval down to the official offer and onboarding. So every step within that HR process is being tracked for them. And they're able to then, as they're just doing their daily work and updating, again, it's updating whoever the hiring owner is, the organization that's doing that hiring. They have the ability to come in and change their priority within the queue. So let's say I need to hire an engineer right away. I've got 3 other hiring actions that HR is working on right now. I can go in as a hiring manager and say, okay, I want to move this one to the top. And it immediately reshuffles for the HR specialist, and the HR specialist shifts their focus onto that one that the hiring manager put as the highest priority. So they're able to manage and maintain that as they just go through their daily activity. They have end-to-end reporting that they have to do that really tracks, and this is a government mandated tracking that they have to do for end-to-end reporting for how long it takes to hire specific types of positions. So an engineer should take X number of days, and I don't remember what the exact number of days is for each position, but they're actually tracked on that, and whether or not, and they were failing miserably at this, by the way, when we first started working with them.
What's the current situation?
They are absolutely on top of it. Part of that is also the fact that they can't hire as many people now because of the hiring freeze and all the other issues that have been going on in HR, but they're absolutely 100% on top of it now. So. There's a personnel worksheet, so for each interested candidate, every person they're working with, they're able to put that person's information in here, kind of when they have their offer, when they're cleared, when their first day was, all those kinds of pieces of information are tracked within here as well. What the accept or decline reasons are, and when they did, or when they accepted, and whether or not they needed relocation, and a whole bunch of other things that they needed about the individual specifics of the hire. So this is just a quick example of an end-to-end report setup. So they wanted really granular control over their reporting and how much information they could get out of it. So this allows them to set that up, and this is what the report would look like for them. So I'm going to skip past down to their moving forward piece. So actually, before I do that, what questions do you have about the system or about what the approach they took?
So the modules themselves, looks like for this particular company, they were customized. Are these modules stock or are they customized?
Yeah, so we have a platform that we've built that we're able to customize to fit the client workflow. So your workflow is going to definitely be different than whatever workflow we plugged in here. You notice the HR and acquisitions are very different types of workflows that we were working with, but they're in the same platform. So, great question.
And this was a government agency. The reason why I say this is because a lot of government agencies went to using monster-type application to hire folks.
Yes.
But that, to me, really wasn't the issue. The issue is what we're talking about here.
Thank you. Yep.
So it wasn't a problem with getting people to apply for jobs. It was getting them
Through the process. Yep.
So I'm just wondering why more of our government facilities have wanted to jump on this bandwagon.
We're trying to raise our hand.
Oh, okay.
But if you could help us with that, we're raising our hand.
I'm going to raise my hand because this was just like phenomenal to me because it's like I've always said about our hiring practice is not that people won't apply.
Yeah.
It's taking them once they apply and getting them into the building.
Loretta, you're absolutely right on.
It's so spot on.
It's the Philadelphia Mint, the whole thing.
Yep.
And we say and scratch our heads and say, why don't we do this more across all government agencies?
Yeah, and you're absolutely spot on. That's the exact problem. It's the exact problem we helped them solve, and it has absolutely changed the way they work. So.
Is it the software that you implemented or you own? Is it server-based or is it cloud-based?
So we have both. So this instance of it, the reason I don't have up-to-date numbers is because they wanted it installed at their organization on their servers. Yeah, and they did that for some early security concerns that were raised. It was at the time when there was the data loss in the government. So everyone was hyper sensitive about security, so they said, okay, we don't want the cloud version, we want the on-premise version, and so we installed the on-premise version. So, but we also have a cloud version, and we're in a tier 4 data center, and we run tons of different applications for a lot of different people that have every kind of requirement from HIPAA to PCI and all the other types of requirements. So having it in the cloud is not an issue from a security perspective.
Quick question. Do you obviously you have check-in and check-out, email, but do you have a viewer where you can actually bring in three-dimensional models and different things like that?
Great question. Not in this solution right here, but we have it in some of our other solutions because we have people who would like to run their own queries against the data. They want to be able to build models and things like that. We don't actually have the modeling for them. We've allowed them to extract it out and use their existing applications because we really don't need to rebuild that. There's some great ones in the market. So.
Just a comment comment. So at Treasury, most of the bureaus use what we call ARC. It's West Virginia. It's the Bureau of Public Debt.
Yep.
And so it's the Administrative Resource Center, I think is the title of it. But they do a lot of the HR function. They do a lot of the financial, a lot of the IT, support type stuff. And I just know in general there is more consolidation around shared services.
There is.
And I think they're steering more towards, for example, if Treasury is supposed to be competent at finances, the other departments of government should look to Treasury to help manage their finances and just their internal stuff. So I know there's going to be more consolidation. There's a push to
There
it.
is.
And but I can see something like this at ARC being very beneficial, and they handle a big portfolio. So
Yeah. Yeah, our hope and our goal is, after having gone through this process, right, and understanding how complex that process is. I mean, we ended up with a sole source contract for a good reason, right? Because after the amount of time it took for us to understand the process and be able to understand how to even help them build the right solution, right? Buying an off-the-shelf product, the problem with that is it doesn't fit your process. You have to try to make your process fit the off-the-shelf product. It's backwards, right? If you're going to do it right, you build the process correctly first, as you guys know, and then you bring in the technology to support that and to support your control, right? And that's the massive difference between this solution and anything that you would ever find in the marketplace. There's just nothing like it out there.
Alan, I have to interject. In fact, even walk on camera to interject.
Please.
The software development world has changed so dramatically over the past 20 years. And the way Alan has set it up, I will say that what in proportion to what other providers would have done, what Alan charged them was a pittance.
Yes.
Right?
No, you're absolutely right. So the challenge they have, right, is that there are government mandated systems they have to use. So they have to use PRISM as in the acquisition side, and I forgot what it was on the HR side. WITS on the HR side. But neither of those systems provide the workflow and reporting functions that they need to do their day-to-day work. And they recognize it, but there's nothing they can do about it. And so they feel like their hands are tied and don't know exactly how to solve that problem. So we built the solution so it will run on top of those solutions, so that they don't have to worry about the integration piece or updating one or the other. And we've struggled to get security clearance to have to allow us access to the API to pull the data and push the data and that kind of stuff. But once you clear those hurdles, technically it's a really easy solution. It's not hard to implement at all. To integrate with other systems, but to implement is super simple. Okay. Any other questions about that? Okay. Just moving forward. Part of this process, part of this journey that we've been on with the Department of Transportation, and I do say journey because it has been 4 or 5 years we've been working with them now, it's really been a very insightful process we've gone through, right? Because we've helped them not only map and understand some of the real challenges they have within their organization, but then been able to help them figure out the right way to solve for those, right? And in the world we live in right now, a combination of process excellence with the right supporting technology is a phenomenal combination, and I don't know anywhere else that it's available, unfortunately, because it's a really great way to approach solving some of these problems, and particularly as you get to your control phase. As you know, communication is one of the biggest challenges to success, and having a system that will help you solve some of those problems is a great benefit. So, okay. So where they're at now, they've now asked that we come in and help them with their finance and legal functions and technical functions. And as I mentioned, I'm going back out there next week to talk to them about the process they're going through for changing their culture and expanding the visual workplace across their center, and the resources that they're going to need to allocate in order to achieve that. So meeting with the center director and the deputy directors, have a short workshop with them to try to figure out how they go about kind of this next major initiative for them. So with that, what final questions do you have?